Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeremy Lloyd, and I'm a production designer and technical designer. And over the past 28 years, I've been working on large-scale productions all over the world, mostly specializing in ceremonies and large-scale music tours, generally sort of stadium-scale shows. And today I'd like to share with you some of what we learnt last year whilst we were developing the design for a new music tour. But first of all, I thought I'd start by delving back into a little bit of history to look at some of the equipment that was being used when I started out in the industry working at Theatre Projects Lighting back in 1990. So many theatrical productions of the time used things like the Strand Pattern 252 effects projector, still a classic, I think, with various effects such as rain, clouds and flames. And the effects themselves were hand-painted glass discs that were mounted into a rotator mechanism. And the mechanism was mounted onto the front of the projector, and then various lenses could be used attached to the front of the effect. And then the images were then projected onto scenery or backdrops and were very much part of the lighting design, which allowed them to adjust the lighting levels and balance everything to achieve a really good effect. And then for concerts and various other sort of dance events, you'd often find the Optikinetics Solar 250, which had things such as the sort of classic oil wheel effect. And they were very much flavour of the month or decade it might have been back then. And these were very small and a cost-effective way of delivering interesting lighting effects at the time. There wasn't much else around really. On larger scale events, the hardware for Zen and Projectors and ETC PG scrollers started to become a familiar sight. And as the name would suggest, the projectors themselves utilised a xenon lamp, which provided much higher light output and more so than a traditional filament lamp. The PG scrollers took a traditional sort of slide transparency and they joined them together to create a long scroll. And then these could be used to change either just between individual images, or they could be used more creatively to produce interesting moving images, graphics, or dissolves between images. And back in 2002, the ETC PG system was used to great effect on a couple of the two biggest events that year. One of them was the Queen's Golden Jubilee, and this is on the facade of Buckingham Palace. And they would dissolve into different images. And the projection was also integrated into a big lighting show with pyro. It was quite a spectacle with thousands of people all the way up the Mall. Also that year was the Manchester Commonwealth Games, and the PG scrollers were used on the field of play. There was a big field cloth. Let's have a quick look here. So on the field here, there's a cloth all the way across, and the projectors were mounted up in the roof. And honestly, at the time, they really weren't that bright. It was balanced for TV, but if you were in the stadium, you couldn't really see the images so well. So we were learning. Around that time, sort of video projection was starting to become sort of more commonplace, with new projector models coming out all the time, always promising sort of higher light levels, better images, better quality. But video projection still really wasn't bright enough for any of these outdoor productions, so it wasn't really an option. During this time, LED screens were also sort of breaking into the market, with products such as the Star Vision and Jumbotron becoming more regular sights on some of the larger sort of arena and stadium shows. The Star Vision container, it was a containerized unit, it weighed something like 20 odd tons, and it was sort of, I don't know, it was sort of 4.5 meters tall, So it didn't actually fit into Wembley Stadium on the back of the truck. You had to crane it off and then tow it in on some machine skids with a sort of little gooseneck trailer. And I sort of first witnessed this myself in '92 during the Freddie Mercury tribute build, which was in itself quite a big spectacle at the time. And following that, really, it was Jumbotron, which certainly, as I remember, was one of the next things that would be on a lot of the tours. And by comparison to the Starvision, it was a much, much lighter weight screen and much easier to handle. And prior to the bigger and more powerful projectors being available, the more traditional 35mm film projectors were still being used for a lot of tours. And here you can see some drawings from the original Wall tour in 1980. And they were doing back projection onto the circular screen from this little tower back here, because this is a view from behind the stage. And also as the wall was built, they'd do projection onto the front surface of the wall. And here you can see the rear projection on the circular screen. So that was, for its time, very groundbreaking. Even as late as 1994, Pink Floyd were using film projection still on their circular screen on the Division Bell tour. And here you can see the projectors mounted on towers behind the huge arched stage structure, providing rear projection onto their circular screen. And here it is in action, again, one of the groundbreaking shows of its time. And by the time Roger Waters restaged the Wall in 2010, there was really no question about using video projection. It was really the way forward. And if you were lucky enough to see that show, I don't know if you've ever wondered how the projection seamlessly appeared on each brick. So as each brick was placed, projection image would appear onto the brick. And basically that was all done with just a lot of planning, a lot of rehearsals, and a cue sheet. And as each brick was placed, it was placed in exactly the same position every single night of the show. And the crew had to practice it over and over and over again. And as they placed a brick, someone front of house at the console would push a button and the projector would just dissolve up. It would unmask each brick as they went around. So here's just for fun, the sequence of cue sheets. So on the sheet, the bold number was the first brick to go down in the sequence. And then each sort of section of bricks, they'd be built in chunks. And they just work all the way across the wall with someone just hitting a button as they went. And then once they got to the last sort of centre section, they'd actually build from the outside. So they'd build from the outside in. I think they were probably getting bored at this point of carrying bricks around. So we'd unmask multiple bricks at a time until they're nearly, just a few more to go, done. However, these days, of course, I think that would actually be automated probably, although it would be a bit tedious having a battery pack in every single brick with an emitter or something in it, but that would be how people would try to do it now. Another less visual, or certainly not intentionally visual, important part of the show is the audio. And back in the early 1990s, before the advent of line array PA systems, the loudspeakers comprised huge hangs of large boxes, such as this system here, the Turbo Sound flashlight. I do know some people actually that think the systems were rather pleasing to the eye, but you have to be in the right field, I think. So I've only touched on a very few products and technology here. There's so many things, thousands of things have been and gone over the past sort of 20 to 30 years. Impossible to cover them all. So I've only really mentioned technology that I was familiar with, or that's sort of most relevant to the time. When compared with today's technology, all of this past technology has a number of things in common. The units were always large and they were heavy. The output wasn't particularly high, and they used a disproportionately large amount of power compared to the light output. And then from a lighting perspective, it was always very difficult to balance the lighting levels, particularly for live television broadcast. I mean, that's still a problem today, but it's getting better and better all the time. And it would look common for for projects such as Manchester Commonwealth Games, is a good example, to look rather underlit as they were trying to balance the projection with the lighting. So I'm going to talk now about the show we designed for last year, and it sort of started back in early 2016, and we embarked on the design for some one-off shows for Roger Waters. And the shows were to be staged at large outdoor sites, not the traditional sports stadia. So this enabled the design to be sort of a very bold scale that was fitting to each location. And there were two locations in Mexico. One was at Forosol at the Mexican Formula One track. The other one was Zocalo Square in the middle of Mexico City. And there was also a third venue in America, in California, the big Polo Club where they hold the Coachella Music Festival each year. And the big look for these shows was the recreation of the Animals album cover, which depicted Battersea Power Station and the infamous flying pig called Algie. And here's a fun little clip of when Algie became famous. So this is the band back in 1976, filming, they're doing a film shoot in Battersea for Algie the pig. A good cup of tea, very English. So it's a big, massive helium-filled pig, a big blimp. And oops, he got away. Allegedly to be shot down by a marksman as he flew over all of the airspace across southern England. So who knows if it was intentional or not. So due to the scale of the sites for these outdoor shows, we were able to create a very large panoramic LED screen, measuring 80 meters wide by 12 meters tall. And that's this screen line running along the back edge here of the stage. And then the screen content obviously was completely specific for these shows due to its sort of wide format nature. The main building for Battersea Power Station was content that was displayed on the LED screen. And then we created large automated inflatable chimneys that would raise up from behind the LED screen sort of halfway through the show. So you can see the chimneys either side here. So at the start of the show they just weren't there, and there was no sort of sign that they were going to appear. And also Algie the pig made a brief appearance here, rigged between two of the chimneys. So overall, height-wise, I mean, these were, sort of, I'm trying to remember now, it should be on this dimension here. But yeah, we were sort of 25 or 30 meters up in the air, so it's quite a big spectacle. And then to add extra dimension, images were projected onto Algie and onto the chimneys. And then during the last of the one-off shows, we started work on the design for the tour that was going to be taking place in the spring of 2017. And the tour was to be a combination of classic Pink Floyd hits and some of Roger Waters' solo material from an album he was about to start recording at the end of 2016. One of the creative concepts, again, was to recreate some of the iconic images from the Pink Floyd era, once again including the Animals album cover and Battersea Power Station. So of course the big challenge was how to recreate Battersea Power Station indoors on a much smaller scale, but still create something looking spectacular. So the first idea was this inflatable power station. So these were very early drawings. So we had the power station here that was an inflatable that rose up from the stage. And in the end, it was obviously, we thought it's not really that practical, as feasible as it might be. Plus the scale of the band next to it just didn't look quite right. And also the viewing angles were strange because it's forced perspective. If you were in certain positions around the venue, it wouldn't look right. Then we explored the idea of making the show an in-the-round show with these 4 inflatable chimneys on the corner of the stage and these long projection screens running down in a big cross over the entire arena. But this just really didn't work very well from a sightline perspective, so we sort of dismissed that idea and moved on. Next, we explored a central spine of projection running down the length of the arena, which seemed to be a better idea with an end on stage. So we continued to develop the ideas from there. And then from a single projection surface, we ended up with 2 parallel surfaces, which would actually come in quite handy for another part of the show. And we didn't want to see 2 full-height projection surfaces throughout the entire show, so we had to think of a creative way of deploying the surfaces that would work with the creative. So the initial thought was to use multiple roll drops, which could be lowered using chain hoists and wire rope winches. This concept worked, but it was quite heavy and it looked a bit bulky. So then we discovered the new product in development. It didn't really have a name at the time. I think we started calling them magic screens, but in the end they're called Rolios. And the Rolio screens comprise a pair of overhead winches, which are up the top here, and then there's some tooth belt comes off the winch instead of a chain or a steel wire rope. And then at the top here we have an 8-inch roller tube, which is the actual roll drop. Got the fabric and then a weighted tube at the bottom. And with this system, the projection screen can be lowered, fully rolled up, so you can lower the entire roll drop down without seeing the support mechanism. And then you can unroll the screen from there. You can either take the top of the screen up, the bottom of the screen down, or you can wipe it open from the center, so you can create lots of really interesting looks. So the next challenge was how to reveal Battersea Power Station and the chimneys from nowhere in the middle of an arena with 18,000 spectators watching. So we designed another inflatable solution, again here with some chimneys, and they lived in these large boxes which were actually clad. And that enabled us to suspend those from the centre of the grid, and they actually lived between the 2 screen surfaces, so they couldn't be seen when they were hidden. But of course, some roll drop screens and inflatable chimneys alone don't really provide much of a spectacle, so we had to project some images onto those surfaces. The projection surfaces are suspended in the middle of the venue on long winch lines, and they help to obviously accentuate the pendulum effect. And there are large amounts of unpredictable air movement within a venue, so that's really not ideal for a screen surface, having a big object swinging around. And this is us just doing a bit of testing to try out the roll drops, testing surfaces. To ensure that we could, as closely as possible, keep the projected images aligned with the correct surfaces, ideally without any distortion, we employed 2 methods. The first method was to provide live encoder feedback from the winch system so that the projectors could closely track the top and bottom of the screen as it went up and down. The second method was to use the VYV photon media server with Albion 3D tracking system. And this uses the Kopernik infrared emitters and infrared cameras. The Koperniks are mounted on the bottom corners of the projection surface on each Rolio and in multiple locations around the perimeter of the chimneys. And the cameras were mounted adjacent to each of the projectors, of which I can't remember the total quantity of projectors. There were big lines of them down each side of the venue. And then due to the layout, we got a good coverage across the entire venue. And here's the emitter layout on the chimneys and the pigs. And the advantage of this system is that if there's air movement in the venue, which there always is, as the bottom of the roll drop screen swings, then the projected image tracks that perfectly, so you never really lose any of the image. Equally, when the chimneys are rising and potentially moving around, they're again being tracked, so the image is always on the object as it swings around, even if the movement isn't particularly large. So now we had our scenic architecture that provided a projection surface, and we had a method of accurately tracking the surfaces as they moved. So all we need now was some bright, high-definition projectors to finish the puzzle. So as touched on when recapping some of the past, I mentioned that projectors were not particularly bright and were big and heavy. So what we were after for this tour was some nice new bright projectors with lower power consumption and relatively small and lightweight. So we decided the way forward was to have a shootout between the sort of latest products. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And during the design process, another issue was raised, and this time one of audio, not visual. So typically, most arena shows, certainly sort of past 10 to 15 years, use line array PA systems. Now, these are very efficient systems, and when tuned correctly, provide high quality audio. However, if someone decides to lower 2 rows of projection in between the main speaker arrays, then the tuning of the PA is immediately ruined, which didn't go down so well. So I'm just trying to get my back here. So the other factor that had to be considered for this particular show is the surround sound as well, because Pink Floyd and Roger Waters have always been known for their sort of audio around the entire venue. They used to be quadraphonic, and these days it's actually full-on surround with 6 separate arrays around the venue. And they have a special mix for the audio, so one person employed just to mix the surround sound audio. So it decided to mock up the projection surface and the PA and test a few projectors. And the only way to properly test everything was to do it at full scale. And this way the production team could look, listen, and fully understand what it was they were proposing to undertake. And that's before committing to quite a significant spend. So in December 2016, we carried out a test in an arena in New Jersey. It was very basic, but fairly extensive. And we hung different types of fabric so that we could understand what worked best for both projection and for audio. And here you can see one of the configurations with a couple of long trusses running down the length of the arena. And then these are the quad PA arrays. In this case, there are 3, but in reality, we ended up with 6 of those. And we tried hanging the fabric at different angles so we could see what worked best visually and sonically. So here we went to a sort of a V-shaped, and there was an X shape here. And for each of these, we tested a selection of various projectors on the surfaces. And that was just a few photos of the test. So as you can see, it's pretty basic, but it told us everything we needed to know. And what we concluded was that the Panasonic 30K laser projector, which was brand new at the moment, it had just come out, that was definitely the brightest and produced the best image, and had a consistent image over time as well. And then the PA worked best with the parallel screens running straight out. And the audio would be set up for different moments. So if the Rolio screens were out, then the projection was tuned, the audio was tuned in one way, and when the screens came down, they'd actually have another preset which retuned the audio. So testing complete, we could finalise the design. So in the end, it looked something a bit like this. We had a 28 metre wide LED screen, 12 metres high, which was the backdrop to the stage. And the stage was positioned immediately just downstage. The LED screen is here, stage here. And then running down the centre of the arena was a huge grid. And from that grid, we were suspending the Rolio roll drops, the pig in a little hamper here, and the chimneys all mounted in these positions. And then we have projection trusses running down either side, and another projector at the far end here. So to reveal Battersea, the closed Rolio roll drops and the chimney black boxes are lowered to just 12 feet above the audience. Well, ideally we wanted to go lower, but people didn't really like that idea of people touching them. And once they're at that level, the tops of the chimneys start to rise from these boxes. So they've come from black and they're just rising, and projection is tracking them as they rise. And then once the chimneys get to full height, then the roll drop screens start to unroll. So it looks like the whole of Battersea has been plucked out of the ground and just lifted up into the air. And then once the move is complete, you basically have Battersea Power Station just floating in the middle of the arena. And later in the show, we also use the roll drops for different effects. So in this case, for money, the chimneys have been taken away, and the roll drops are doing a sort of a chase move with the projection tracking them. Here, we end up putting the roll drops at their full height and just using them as a conventional projection screen. And then for the end of the show, the roll drops are taken away again, and we just have a laser effect, in this case recreating the Dark Side of the Moon album cover with the big prism. And here's a brief look at the finished product. So this is the start of the show. All the roll drops are hidden away, no one knows they're there. And we have a large LED screen upstage. That's for the first half of the show. And then later on we have Battersea Power Station appears in the middle of the arena. Oops, gone too far there, sorry. Then we have Battersea again. Plus we've got an additional pig here, which is a big helium inflatable remote control that flies around. That also uses the VYV tracking system, this time for some moving lights, so it's connected to the lighting console. This is the roll drops doing their little chase. This is for money. And then we have the laser prism, which is sort of the finale of the show. And then here we have a little clip. So, what next? So, what technical developments can we expect or hope for that will make the process quicker, easier, or more spectacular? We need to be more and more aware of the impact we're having on the planet and the way we're doing things. And we need to find ways of using less energy, using fewer trucks, cargo ships, aeroplanes, less fuel, and generally use less of the planet's resources. This would all point toward more efficient equipment, so such as lighting sources, power supplies, amplifiers, and then the packaging of everything into smaller dimensions to take up less space and require less trucks. So when trying to design these shows, it's always easy to get carried away and to use more, to make them bigger, to make them better. It's fun, it's exciting. But at some point we must find ways of creating these spectacles using less and being more economical, less waste. Because after all, it's often said, less is more. I guess we just need to find a balance, because after all, the events we create do bring happiness to the masses that go to see them, generally. And you can't always put a value on that. So during this presentation, the we that I've mentioned throughout, it's not just me or Wonderworks, it's a whole team of people involved in the design process, from Roger Waters and his creative director Sean Evans, who comes up with the creative ideas that we do our best to deliver. And we've got the video director Richard Turner, lighting director Pryderi Baskerville, and then Tate, one of the suppliers who helped us develop the Rolio roll drops, build the stage, and then Inventions and Airworks here in Holland, who help us with the chimneys and algae. There's also a huge number of production staff on the road with this, keeping it going day in, day out, with a lot of suppliers. So have to always remember them. Don't want to take all the credit. And do we have time now for some questions, I guess? Or not? No. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for listening.